Are there any motions to take note of answers? Senator Conroy.
I rise to take notice of Senator Fifield's answers. Mr Deputy President, when Malcolm Turnbull released his strategic review in December 2013, he said it was, and I quote, "the most thorough and objective analysis of the national broadband network ever provided to Australians." And he also said, importantly, all forecasts in the strategic review have been arrived at independently by NBN Co, and in the view of the company and its expert advisors are both conservative and achievable. This, as we've all come to understand, was simply empty waffle. So let's just go through the highlights. Mr Turnbull said his second-rate NBN would cost $29.5 billion. We know now that it will cost almost double that, up to $56 billion. He said he would get his second-rate NBN to all homes in Australia by this year. This year, 2016. This time frame has now more than doubled to 2020. And he said that his second-rate copper NBN would cost $600 per home. And this cost has nearly tripled to $1,600 a home. He said it would cost $55 million to patch up the old copper network. This cost has blown out by more than 1,000%. 1,000% to more than $640 million. He said that 2.61 million homes would be connected to the pay TV cables by 2016. NBN is now forecasting they will connect only 10,000 homes by June 2016. So they are only 2.6 million homes short of their targets. But let's just ignore that. Mr Turnbull also said that his second-rate network would bring in $2.5 billion in revenue in 2016 and 2017. This has crashed to only $1.1 billion. He has blown a $1.4 billion hole in NBN Co's revenue forecasts. And just today, yet another leaked document from NBN Co has revealed that Mr Turnbull's second-rate copper NBN is hopelessly delayed and over budget. Internal documents reveal that NBN Co has met less than a third of its internal rollout target for Mr Turnbull's second-rate copper NBN. Now, these delays are due mostly to problems with connecting mains power to Mr Turnbull's large street-side copper cabinets. These delays are entirely of Mr Turnbull's own making. And the great tragedy about this and the other litany of failed targets revealed in this document is every single one of them were forecast in the transition to government documents. This is not like this has suddenly been discovered. All of these problems were identified clearly before Mr Turnbull undertook this path. But no, he's magic. He is able to transform the real world into Mr Turnbull's own private, just believe everything I say and ignore everything I've ever said before him moments. And what we've seen in this document, that Mr Turnbull's copper NBN is coming in over budget, despite recent assurances from officials who sat at Senate estimates and told us all that it was on target. It was on target. And it would be remiss to not mention directly Senator Fifield's answers to the questions, because Senator Fifield quite deliberately avoided answering any question that was asked to him today.
Order, Senator. Your time has expired. Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. And I must say it's really quite extraordinary that we should be standing here today taking note of the NBN again. I think since we've changed government in 2013, I can't imagine how many times we've stood up here and discussed the NBN. And it always seems to be that it is constantly, somehow Senator Conroy seems to think that if he continues to bring these things up in question time, we take note, and he can defend the legacy that he left to us when we came into government, that was the NBN at the time. But I noticed that today's the question that was asked today seemed to be largely around a media story this morning about some leaked documentation, that made its way into the media. And I might say that Senator Conroy might well remember the Milton trial site leaked documents. Once again, we have exactly the same situation occurring here, Mr Deputy President, where the documents that we seem to get are always ones that actually haven't been verified. They haven't been peer group reviewed. Unfortunately, Senator Conroy seems to think that if he can go and find a scrap piece of paper in the rubbish bin that's thrown there, and he can somehow turn that round to be some sort of great factual claim about what's going on, it really is really quite distressing. But Senator Fifield stood today and put on the record. He's made media statements, and he's again in question time today made statements that actually say that the NBN is on track to meet its targets for the financial year, within budget set out in the company's corporate plan, and any suggestion to the contrary is just wrong. Well, who is right here? Senator Conroy, who appears to think that scabbing through rubbish bins and finding pieces of information is more credible than the information that's put on the public record by the minister, and as in the case of the previous minister, the now Prime Minister. So let's just be clear about what's happening here. We are trying, I think, the opposition to defend the indefensible. There was so much money wasted under the previous administration. I mean, my understanding is that in excess of $6 billion had been spent to deliver the broadband or capacity to access the broadband to less than 3% of premises in Australia. Now, Mr Deputy President, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar if you extrapolate that out. If it cost $6.5 billion to get to 3% of premises, how much is going to cost to get to all premises, especially when you consider that many of the premises that were actually got access at the earlier stages of the NBN rollout under the previous administration were those that were easier, the low-hanging fruit concept, which is often used in this place as a term to describe taking the easy stuff first. Well, the other thing that this government isn't doing is we aren't going for the easy, the low-hanging fruit first. What we're trying to do, as well as deliver this, the broadband, the NBN, as quickly as possible to the most amount of people as possible, as cheaply as possible, is we're also trying to make sure that we deliver it to those people that have either got very, very poor access or have no access first. Instead of going out and trying to focus on where you're going to get the quickest return for your money, actually trying to deliver this a little more equitably to all Australians. The other thing that we also seem to fail to mention in the narrative about the NBN is the fact that unfortunately you have to afford to be able to deliver everything. Now, Senator Conroy and your gold-plated NBN that you were proposing to roll out, absolute gold-plated. I wouldn't go on about satellites, Senator Conroy, because we know what happened with your interim satellites. All the people that were supposed to get access to the satellites because they couldn't get NBN by other means, Mr Deputy President, they were the ones that were supposed to get access to the satellite, but unfortunately we oversold it to the providers, so they sold it out to everybody, so we ended up with too too many people on the satellites, so those that are on the satellites actually had a very poor service, and my people that lived in the country in remote areas where they couldn't get access to the NBN or to internet by other means were actually disadvantaged by the crazy way that those opposite dealt with the interim satellites. So I find it very surprising that Senator Conroy would think that he would raise the satellites as a point of contention here when his track record on satellites has got to be some of the worst in the world. But back quickly to the budget in the last couple of seconds that I've got left here. I mean, the reality is that we've got delivered to us as a government one of the worst budget positions that you could ever imagine, and we're trying to be responsible and manage this government within the constraints that the budget gives us.
Senator, your time has expired. Senator McLucas.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. I also rise to take note of answers given by Minister Fifield today around the NBN. Well, the trials and the tribulations of now now Prime Minister but former Communications Minister Mr Malcolm Turnbull's second-rate NBN had another sad chapter in their history today with the leaking of yet another internal document that is full of damning data that shows that cost blowouts and delays in the rollout of the NBN are certainly what's happening out there in NBN land. And Senator Rushton seems to think that this is some scrap of paper that's found in someone's rubbish bin. It's disappointing that a front bencher from that side would try and, that's what I said, a front bencher would try and say that this is a document that can be just forgotten and not taken any notice of. This is a comprehensive internal document. It warrants proper scrutiny. It warrants an understanding of how dire these problems actually are, so that we can find out where we're up to with the rollout of this second-rate NBN today. So that's the background to why I ask questions in question time today of Minister Fifield. My first question, the substantial question, is the question that was not answered at all. I pointed Senator Fifield to the fact that on the 22nd of February of this year, the Minister said in this chamber that the rollout of the Prime Minister's copper NBN, the second-rate NBN, was, and I quote, accelerating. This document that has been released today is dated the 19th of February 2016. That is some 3 days prior to Senator Fifield saying that the NBN rollout was accelerating. And so I asked a reasonable question: was the Minister informed that the NBN rollout was behind schedule, as this document clearly shows? Not a little bit behind schedule, but desperately behind schedule, before or after he made his statement? When did he know that what he has said in this chamber is not accurate? Now, Senator Fifield said he didn't accept the premise of my question. I now invite Senator Fifield to go back and look at the Hansard of both the 22nd of February and of question time today and think about whether or not he needs to revisit the answer that he gave to my question today. I also asked Senator Fifield that the question whether all other significant milestones of fibre to the node, FTTN, continue to remain behind target, as this document clearly states. He said no, he didn't think that was a good thing. That was true, and then spent a lot of time criticising Labor. Mr Deputy President, I've recently taken on the role of the Chair of the Senate Select Committee on the NBN. The NBN is not a policy area that I've spent a lot of time with in the past, so a lot of this is new to me. I'm now engaged in a level of policy detail and rollout detail that I was not as up to date with before. And frankly, this is a disaster. After all of the criticism of the government of Labor's NBN rollout, it is frankly amazing that Mr Turnbull and now Minister Fifield can defend their record. When they came to government, they had a coming into government document that predicted that if the policy approach that was taken by the now government, described then in opposition, they would end up with this sort of mess. They knew. Was not unsurprising. But then Mr Turnbull released his strategic review in December 2013, and he said it was the most thorough and objective analysis of the NBN ever provided to Australians. And my colleague, Senator Conroy, has gone through all of those empty promises that we have now realised, that it is double the cost. He said it would be 29.5 million, it's now 56, sorry, I said million, it's billion. Let's remember this is big money. $29.5 billion was what Minister then Turnbull said his NBN would cost. It's now up to $56 billion. If you doubled the rollout, the cost rollout of any project, you would be sacked. In fact, then Minister Turnbull has now been promoted.
Senator Bernardi.
Yes, I perfectly understand, Mr Deputy President, how one could be lulled into a sense of deep slumber through that defence of the NBN. Mr Deputy President, it's wise for us to consider exactly how the NBN came to come about. The NBN may have been conceived through a decision or a determination to, bring the benefits of high-speed internet to the Australian consumers. But it was a program that was supposed to cost $4 billion until the giant fingers of passion fingers, Senator Conroy, and his colleague, his mentor, the man whom he admired so much, former Prime Minister Rudd, got on a plane together and they got a box of peanuts and a napkin and a pen, and the rest is history. Billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars was determined to be spent on a VIP jet over some popcorn, some peanuts and a napkin. The NBN was scrawled on the back of a napkin, and the Australian people have been paying the price for that lack of planning ever since. And since that time, Senator Conroy has been involved in what could only be politely termed legacy sandbagging, where he's gone and sought to run interference and pile up the case after case after case about why his napkin plan was suitable and appropriate for Australia. Well, let me tell you, right from the word go, it's failed the public interest test. It's failed the public interest test not because having a fast broadband network across the country is not in the interests of Australians. I think it probably is. Should the government be doing it? There's a matter of politics in that. But the fact is, it's gone from $4 billion to $8 billion to $16 billion to $32 billion to about $49 billion of taxpayer money being thrust into it. And Senator Conroy likes to criticise the fixing that is being done by this government. But, Mr Deputy President, the fixing done by this government is because of the falsehoods that have been spun out of the previous government. And if we want to have a look at it, the 2010 corporate plan said it was claimed the NBN would pass 1 million premises with its fixed line network by June 30, 2013. Now, Mr Deputy President, not the 1 million premises, we could understand there's a bit of hyperbole around that, but no one really thought the then government would have overestimated their own abilities by nearly 8-fold. The fact was, after the 3 years, it managed to reach 165,000 premises. Not the 1 million that Senator Conroy and his ilk said, but 165,000 premises. And it cost so much more than it was scheduled to. And that's because there was a complete lack of planning, a complete lack of consideration of the national interest, a complete lack of any prudence, any cost-benefit analysis, and that's because the people behind it were not grounded in reality. Now, I know that Senator Conroy seeks to blame former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd for the failings of this. But Kevin Rudd does have many failings, of which we could expand for a long, long time in this chamber, but we're not going to, because Mr Rudd was driven to make these irrational and not sensible decisions by none other than Senator Conroy and his famous napkin. Now, the point is that since then, rather than retire and go into the void, the void of the Kevin Rudd legacy just retire and get out of Parliament and hide away from the poor decisions, Senator Conroy didn't want to do that. So he stayed in this place and he's tried to monster and bully people into accepting his version of events. Unfortunately, the truth is somewhat departed from where Senator Conroy is locating himself. And this is the point about the NBN. Yes, it has some benefits.
Senator Bernardi, if you just resume your seat. Senator Conroy on a point of order.
Look, I think it's traditional when you have a conflict of interest that you have to declare your conflict of interest. And I think it's very important that Senator Bernardi declares that he has fibre to the home at his home and loves it. So I think that is a complete conflict of interest in this debate.
I've heard enough, Senator Conroy. Senator Brandis on the point of order.
I know Senator Conroy never takes the standing orders or the procedures of the Senate seriously. But plainly, Mr President, from the moment he opened his mouth, that was not a point of order and he should have been ruled out of order at once.
Yes.
I didn't get a chance to finish before you allowed the chair to rule me.
Ultimately, that is a conclusion I've come to, and I could have ruled him out of order, but I had to give him an opportunity to at least say what his point of order was, but there is no point of order. Senator Bernardi.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. And the cavalier manner in which Senator Conroy regards the Senate standing orders, I think, does resemble, with less catastrophic consequences, I must say, how he went about designing the NBN. I mean, what I think he did, he drew a map of Australia on his coaster and he pointed to Sydney, and then he drew a line to Adelaide and one to Melbourne and somewhere else, and he said, there we go, that's $5 billion. But it wasn't, it was nearly $50 billion. $50 billion, and he didn't even get it to some of the regional centres. Now, the point is, he couldn't maybe draw that many lines all at once, but the point is, Senator Conroy has spent his time in this place to tearing something down that we are trying to build and to fix.
Order, Senator, your time has expired. Senator Billig.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I too rise to take note of answers from the Minister for Communications from questions from Senator McLucas in regard to the National Broadband Network. And the Minister's answers today were thoroughly disappointing, as is the government's record so far on this whole saga. Well, Senator Bushby, I'll get to you and your interest in NBN and how much you help people in a minute. But ever since the government adopted its farcical multi-technology mix policy, it's become clearer each day that the abbreviation NTM more appropriately stands for Malcolm Turnbull's mess, and we've heard it a number of times. The phrase fast, affordable, sooner that underpinned his government's pre-election promise on the NBN has to be one of the greatest frauds visited on the Australian people. It's an absolute joke. 2.5 years in government, with a promise to deliver the NBN to every home and business, and all they've got to show for it is a measly 29,000 fibre-to-the-node connections and not one HFC connection. That's absolutely incredible. And every time we think that Malcolm Turnbull's mess cannot possibly get worse, the problem deepens. Now, the latest results are detailed in a report leaked to Fairfax Media. And I did note today that the Minister didn't actually deny that that a report existed or that the figures were inaccurate. So that's it's pretty interesting to watch what he didn't actually say as opposed to the rather disappointing answers that he did give. But we see this whole disaster about NBN deepening right before our very eyes, and it's no wonder the government's done everything they can to hide their mess, because they want to cover up their bungles and their cost blowouts. And despite this government's promise for greater scrutiny and greater transparency, they've shrouded the NBN in a veil of secrecy that would make Kim Jong-un blush. Now, this leaked report that we've been talking about shows that NBN Co has only reached one third of its target for construction completions.
You know, well, they won't release anything.
While 1.4 million premises should have been approved at the date of February 19 report, only 660,000 premises, or less than half of the targets, were approved. And there is a 23% increase in the cost of construction per premise, up from $1,114 to $1,366. And this is on top of the disaster that we already knew about. We already knew the cost of Mr Turnbull's second-rate NBN was supposed to be $29.5 billion. It's almost doubled under the current government to $56 billion. And Mr Turnbull promised to complete the entire rollout by the end of this year, but it's now projected to be completed by the end of 2020, and only 14% of Australian premises will have the NBN by the government's self-imposed deadline. And the cost of fixing the old copper network, well, this is a doozy. This has been blown out by 1,000%. 1,000%, with the government having to purchase 8.5 million metres of new copper. 8.5 million metres. Now, I've spoken before, on quite a few occasions, in fact, in this place, on the local consequences of Malcolm Turnbull's mess. And in response to a question I asked in Senate estimates, NBN Co revealed that they'd reached only 8% of underserved premises by the end of last financial year, despite Mr Turnbull's promise to prioritise the rollout to the worst-served areas. Now, one of those areas, Senator Bushby, you might be interested in are the suburb of Howden. And now, I know you know where Howden is. It's a suburb just south of Hobart, quite near my electorate office in Kingston. And that's a Category E for broadband availability, and they're still waiting for NBN. So they're in the worst of the 5 categories for broadband availability, and they're still waiting for NBN. And it was pretty disappointing to see them left off the list for the NBN Co's latest rollout plan. The second time that it's happened, we spoke to NBN about Howden being left off the list previously, and they made the same mistake again. They left them off again. And this was not only after we'd spoken to them, but after NBN had come to public meetings where the 600 residents of Howden were so concerned they had a petition that I tabled in this place not that long ago in regard to the way they've been treated and the whole issue around lack of availability in Howden. As I said, Howden's not some far-flung outreach of,
Senator,
Australia.
Your time has expired. The question is that the motion moved by Senator Conroy be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it. Are there any further motions to take note of answers?